This is the Curious Pundits podcast, hosted by Kevin and Emanuel. They explore bits of everything through thoughtful conversations, prioritizing curiosity over conclusions, and they thank you for joining them. Now, on to the podcast.
Hello, this is another episode of the Curious Pundits podcast. I'm Kevin.
I'm the co-host Emanuel, and today's topic is how the world would look like in the next, we discussed earlier 10 years, but I think 10 years is such a long term, feels like such a long term that I wouldn't actually go that far, and I will look at 3 to 5 years. Now, do we have a crystal ball? I don't know about yours. Mine is still at the mechanic, trying to repair it, since it kind of gives me the wrong data about some SEO predictions that I used to do. So he didn't get that one right. But since both you and I and most people that we know are using AI tremendously, and things changed even from the beginning of this year. We're recording this somewhere in the second part of June 2026, and things have changed tremendously since January 2026, since we actually launched this podcast altogether. So I thought maybe this is a good opportunity to record an episode and do this imagination. It's an exercise to kind of see where potentially the world will be going, and maybe we'll get a few things right. Why not? Kevin, thoughts?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. The first thought is, who are we to be able to make such predictions? The second thought is that there are some unmistakable tensions in the world, which I think is what we ought to talk about, and then how these things might unfold. So I've personally identified, I would say, 3 broad areas of tensions being created in the world. The first one of which is AI. It is fundamentally a transformative technology, and it's going to have a big impact in a variety of ways. The next one is the canary in the coal mine for climate change is the insurance industry. As extreme weather events become both larger and more numerous, they're going to cause more and more destruction of buildings, farm crops, and that's going to result in more and more insurance claims, and insurance companies are going to come under more strain, and it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds.
I wonder what the prices will do.
In some cases, it's prices. In other cases, it's just availability. Some private insurance companies are already not renewing property insurances in Florida because they're anticipating damages that they can't cover by the amount of premiums they're allowed to charge. So they're like, we're just not going to do it. You can't have a housing market without mortgages. You can't have mortgages without insurance. So when the private insurers leave, who's going to step in? And the answer is the state of Florida or the United States. This is what always happens. So a government comes in with a insurance plan that is a very high deductible, very high premium, but it's better than nothing. That's just what happens, right? And then, what's that?
The third one, you said there are 3.
Yeah, the third one is what I'm going to call geopolitics, just in aggregate. As the United States accelerates the rate at which they are withdrawing from a position of leadership for the entire world. And let me segue briefly into that. The last empire was the British Empire, and what identified them as the empire was that they policed the global maritime shipping routes to make sure that global trade continued as uninterrupted as possible. And after World War II, the United States took on that role. What defines the United States as the global superpower is that the United States Navy policed the global shipping lanes. And the global shipping lanes have become increasingly important since the end of World War II, which is when the U.S. took over this role, simply because of the sheer volume of global trade. As the U.S. kind of retreats from that position of global leadership, it's going to create these power vacuums all over the world that are going to be filled in various ways. And I think that's the other main pressure point to be discussed.
We're going to get to that. I also realized that it's been a while since you and I have recorded an episode. We had so many amazing guests, by the way, amazing guests. So this was long due, essentially. Three topics. I agree. Where do you want to start with? From which one?
Let's start with AI. It's the 8 million pound gorilla on the planet right now.
Or maybe the last one, because I think this AI has the power to influence all the others, including climate change, including global powers.
Yeah, okay, let's start with global powers.
So United States, as you said, it's drawing. We established from previous episodes, all the world leaders, thought leaders are kind of like in agreement that China has taken a significant role in leadership. And we have seen for the past couple of years, especially since the current administration, the Z administration has taken an active role, a more, what's the word I'm looking for? I won't say necessarily active, but more of a presence, has established itself as a presence in and shown interest in the global affairs. Now, by far, by what we understand in the Western society as being the dominant power, the influencer, and the leader, but still, it's probably the next world leader, right? Inevitably.
I actually would push back on the word inevitably. But anyway, go on, yes. And then I'll add in.
That's where I struggle with as well. Inevitably, because, and I still have the struggle understanding that, and maybe I'm sometimes not seeing the big picture. I always feel like I don't have all the pieces of the information. But also, I don't believe that, at the moment at least, it sells the dream that actually built previously probably the United Kingdom, and then we all know America, right? Building the dream, the American dream, where you can come to regardless from where you are, regardless of your background. If you work hard and do all those things, then you will end up being somehow successful. And I'm not saying that you can't achieve that in China, but I'm not sure about their immigration policies, for example. I'm not sure about how certain things that for me are important, like religious freedom, for example. And probably the single most influential thing is the economic aspect. You're right. Okay, who has access to the wealth? So those are my thoughts.
Let me talk about an important economic aspect about being a superpower. Now, I think part of what you just spoke about, like China being the dominant entity, and I hear a lot of people talk about China might be the dominant entity. I think we buy into the concept of the dominant entity because we've lived our entire lives under a two superpower and then a one superpower model. But this is not necessarily the model that will be carried into the future. And the reason I say that is so in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference, the American delegation said the US dollar will be the global reserve currency. And if you got a problem with that, get over it, right? This is just the way it's going to be, right? If you're going to insist that your currency be the global reserve currency, everyone in the world has to have some of it. You have to literally ship your currency overseas. Otherwise, they can't use it to buy stuff because they don't have it. Now, the easiest way to do that is to run a balance of trade deficit, to import a lot more than you export. And through that process, people all around the world, they collect US dollars. So that has contributed to a decline in US manufacturing. We export less, therefore we don't need to build as much. But the accumulation of US dollars in the hands of other people leads to them wanting to do things with them. So they have this stash of US dollars in some account someplace. And if it just sits there, it doesn't get any interest. And if they invest it in something, it gets a return on investment. Well, where are the bulk of the assets that one can invest in with US dollars? In the United States, right? So that's why Brazilian companies are buying American meat processing companies, and Chinese individuals and companies are buying American farmland. They got a ton of US dollars they're sitting on because it's the global reserve currency, and they want to do something good with it, right? So they're buying American assets, and a lot of Americans are like, should we be allowing this? And from a national security perspective, the answer is probably no. But way back in 1944, when we declared that the US dollar would be the reserve currency, we set this in motion. Well, China doesn't seem very open to people who are not Chinese buying assets in China. So as a result of that, do they want their currency to be the global reserve currency? Because if it is, people are going to want to do that, and it's going to put pressure on their economy, and they probably don't want to do that, right? So my basis for pushing back on the idea that it's inevitable, China probably doesn't want to be the dominant empire because they want to keep their economy relatively closed and they want to keep exporting to the rest of the world. It's working really well for them, and why would they want to change plans now?
Don't have an answer.
I know it's a big question, right? If we move into the future and there isn't a dominant superpower, what does that mean? It means we're going to have a series of regional powers. The Americas could become an economic bloc. Asia could become an economic bloc. And Europe, maybe with Africa, could become an economic bloc. And there'll be a lot of trade and commerce within the bloc, and there'll be trade within blocs. But in terms of geopolitics, I think it's fairly likely that there's going to be a whole bunch of regional powers.
With that, I agree. And in a sense, it already kind of is, and it always has been, just that some powers were more powerful. And right now, I said, is the AI component that's coming along. And it's not unlikely that the Asian AI will work different than the North American AI, which will be significantly different than the European AI, which will be different than the South America and whatnot. We're talking about more than the LLMs that we have right now. We're talking about, as they call it, the Universal General Artificial Intelligence, AGI, or expand that. And that automatically implies that what I'm trying to say is that it gives smaller entities a power that they wouldn't have had previously, and they become dominant in certain way. I'm giving the example of El Salvador, for example, a small country which has changed tremendously, nevertheless, due to the power of the Bitcoin, the blockchain, the cryptocurrency, which in the area, not a global influence, not a global power, but within the area, in those regions, it has become and obviously it's subject to debate, how good for the overall general state of well-being is, probably. But for those who don't know, El Salvador had one of the biggest crime rates around the world, per capita murders all over. They have a controversial president who have jailed most of the criminals, and also has pegged Bitcoin as the main, has pegged their currency to Bitcoin as opposed to gold, the US dollars, as everyone else has it, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's what happened.
I think El Salvador does both. I'm going to Google for that.
We need to Google, yeah. That's why something I don't remember. But nevertheless, it made an impact locally. Now, a technology like that has the power to give more agency to smaller independent nations that would have otherwise be at the mercy of larger ones that, don't have either some natural resources or some human capital or whatnot. But most likely the world will look like a few regions that would have their own influence. There's this political thinker from Russia, Alexander Dugin, and he was very adamant on promoting the pan-Eurasian continent, putting Russia at the center of the world, essentially. But nevertheless, having other countries being under the influence, and we're talking about the former USSR and more, depends who you ask. But I said, we don't have the answers. We just make some
it's fun to speculate.
Speculations, that's the word. But I believe that the technology can give some power to the little guy, essentially. And just
I think in more ways than one. To segue into, looking for the right words here, but the relationship between economic dominance and military dominance has always been pretty tight, going back to the beginning of human civilization. The people with the biggest, baddest armies who could inflict the most lethal force the fastest tended to run things. And then their currency became the dominant currency and all that good stuff, right? But if you take a look right now, both Ukraine and Iran are holding their own against what were believed to be vastly superior militaries using relatively inexpensive technologies, ballistic missiles and drones. So this is the case where a technology is definitely giving the little guy a strategic advantage and a tactical advantage over the big guys. and they're not tolerant of being pushed around quite as much.
I wouldn't call Iran the little guy. We need to remember, I always try to refer to as Persia, so not Iran like a random country, but Persia, an empire, a history, has ruled the world, and especially that part of the world, for thousands of years. So it's not like, oh yeah, we can stand up a few aggressors because we're united and fighting for the same front. As well as Ukraine, we need to remember that during the USSR period, most of the missiles were on their territory, and because of strategic locations as well, the nuclear missiles. And inevitably that prepared the population, the local population, which previous what happened, the current Ukrainian population were like very mixed. So many Russian people were living in Ukraine. As Ukrainians, we won't go into there. So I wouldn't say necessarily that Ukraine is the little guy. Yes, you would expect, because it's this narrative of the Russian force, but realistically, people who are like new weren't taken by surprise. Whereas the El Salvador case, if you all asked me 5 years ago, will it ever turn a corner? Not in a million years. We need to remember that they had the highest crime per capita for a long time, and the culture, the gang culture there was like embedded in the daily life, and somehow it turned a corner with the help of, at the right time, right? The time played a huge role, right? Bitcoin was, I don't know, a couple of thousands, and all of a sudden it turned to 60,000 and then 100K overnight. So whatever investment made, more than 10x overnight. That gave access to some capital that will have moved things around. Other significant players internationally that you think that could make a stand? And I'm not talking about the World Cup.
Yeah, understood, right? Although I learned, I'm going to get on a soapbox, I get in every once in a while, and I learned yesterday a remarkable statistics. So of the, God, it's been so long since I looked at this. Is it 32 teams who enter the World Cup?
48, I think.
Okay, so 48 teams go in, half get eliminated. So yeah, they're going to go to, that would mean it would be, so 24 teams go to the round of 16.
Let's go.
I can't believe I don't know this. But anyway, I'm having trouble with the numbers, right? But anyway, the comment made was, of all of the nations competing in the World Cup right now, only one does not have universal health care.
Which is?
The United States.
Yes.
I was like, that can't be true. But apparently it's true, right?
Same
but
time,
anyway.
Who dreams of immigrating to Uzbekistan, for example?
Well, people dream of immigrating to Canada.
But if
I mean, there's lots of countries that I wouldn't want to immigrate to, but there's lots that I would.
If they can't get into the US, right?
Maybe. Believe it or not, there are some people who don't want to get into the US, especially these days. But anyway, back to who are the other players on the global stage? I have this weird idea that one of the major players on the global stage today is current Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. That speech he gave at Davos, where he spoke about the middle powers, it just kind of sucked me right in. I think he's onto something. His basic idea is that what he calls the middle powers need to kind of hang together and then do this strength in numbers kind of thing. And basically, he's talking about a trading bloc of relatively small countries. Canada, Ireland, Australia, Hungary.
It's not exactly small, eh? Maybe in terms of population, of course, but in terms of region and, most importantly, natural resources, I wouldn't call it actually by far small.
Yeah, Canada's not small in terms of square miles, but the size of the population, the size of the economy. And for what it's worth, when I referred to Iran as the little guy, it was in comparison to the United States. Like the United States is failing to defeat Iran militarily, which is like, wow.
The argument that Vietnam, the communist Vietnam, was less prepared than Iran is today, I would argue, but still they took a stand. I'm not sure. Afghanistan also, it's an example.
Actually, Afghanistan is an extreme example. So I actually read a book a while ago about the history of Afghanistan, going back to Alexander the Great. Do you know how many times Afghanistan was successfully occupied? Successfully meaning the locals didn't drive you out.
I don't think it was Was it ever? Or just made?
Never.
They had a post there.
Right? Like they do not like being occupied. 2,300 years is like, we do not like being occupied.
No, you
I don't
can't.
know
It's
what it
one of
is
those
about
countries.
the mindset there, but they do not like being occupied. No one has
Yeah.
really stayed in Afghanistan when the Afghan people fought them to leave.
And geographically, it's not an advantage to the aggressor, the ones that wants to conquer. That's one. The second is the local culture, because Afghanistan is a mix of many cultures there. It's not just like one culture. Historically, they've been more influenced by Persia. They were also influenced by the, how to call it, the Indian Empire, Indian states and regions, but mostly by Persia. But it's kind of like a local ethos that doesn't matter right now, as far as I understand, of course, and based on what I've spoken with, doesn't matter what kind of cultural or ethnicity you are. It's if you adhere to this ethos, then you're Afghan, essentially. And yeah, it's almost impossible to dominate that area. But I said, yeah, little guy, big guy, I wouldn't call Iran by far the little guy. Maybe a little bit underdog, maybe like a champion that has had a couple of rough years, yes, but still a champ and still a powerful entity that has proven that it can stand on their own, probably at tremendous cost, of course, some cost that any other country wouldn't have put up with. But I'm thinking maybe some other influencers around regions such as Africa or South America. Brazil, for example, is an interesting topic to explore a little bit because it has the potential, at least from I always look at the human capital as well. So not just the numbers, not just the natural resources, but I won't call it culture, but the way of people approach when doing things, and can they actually do some stuff. And based on my interaction with people from Brazil, I think that they can do more stuff than people from other countries. So anything like that on your end, and maybe we should discuss BRICS as well, because that's an interesting entity. BRICS, for those who don't know, is Brazil, Russia, India,
China, Saudi Arabia.
Saudi
but now
Arabia.
it's like, it's a fairly large trading bloc these days.
Yes. So
well, I don't
perhaps,
know about fairly large, but it's much larger than just those 5 nations.
Yeah, but those are the most powerful, the most influential ones. And probably similar entities could come up in the near future. For example, in Romania, there was a very not so popular, but there was a train of thought of organizing ourselves more closely with our neighbors and start developing more trading with Bulgaria or Serbia, which Bulgaria is part of the European Union. Serbia is not. Nevertheless, historically, we had relationships, important relationships. And I know, for example, because of the communist regime in Romania was so drastic, they wouldn't broadcast anything. So people were tuning in because Bulgaria is fairly close to, especially people in Bucharest, to listen to games, to football games, or to watch some cartoons in Bulgarian, and some people can say phonetically how they were like, what they were listening there, right? That was not fun. So there's this historical relationship there. And to an extent, at least for a short period, those would be beneficial for everyone if you establish this kind of like trade with Romania being the biggest player and kind of have it influence the way this dictates. But at a slightly larger scale, do you see any other country that can potentially influence some regions?
I think the main point of what you spoke about is valid, likely, and probably going to unfold that way. So Irish economist David McWilliams has he's a master of like pithy little statements. And he has one, historically, nations trade with their neighbors. This is how we've always done it. People trade with other people who are in geographic proximity. So the idea that there would be a Balkans trade bloc, it just makes perfect sense. Now, of course, the Balkans has had some ethnic strife issues well beyond what other people consider reasonable and normal that have the potential to interfere in trade. But Yugoslavia got broken up and maybe they've moved beyond that, and who knows, right? I hope so.
Yeah, not entirely. Progress has been made, but there's still room for more reconciliation.
The basic idea behind not the basic idea, but one of the ideas behind globalization was as we developed increasing interdependence in terms of trade, we would be less likely to go to war. That didn't really pan out. The Russia-Ukraine thing, like in theory, our interdependence on trade would have prevented that conflict, and it didn't. So, I don't know what the main drivers there are, but I do think that regionalness is likely to be a much more dominant theme. I think that, so let me talk a little bit about what I understand about BRICS. A lot of people seem to think that BRICS has this desire for a global reserve currency, which is going to replace US dollar. So there's a BRICS newsletter I read on Substack called Think BRICS, and some of the articles are just absolute crap, but some of them are really good and insightful. So to a certain extent, it allows me to stay abreast of what the BRICS bloc is doing and potentially thinking about doing. And they have created a kind of like a trading currency, and it's made up of a basket of currencies, but it's 40% gold. But it doesn't seem as if their big focus is on having a currency. They just need an accounting unit in which to tabulate their trade. What they really want is to break free of the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. They feel and articulate often that the rules of global trade are specifically designed to benefit the wealthier countries more. So the rules of trade are, according to these guys, set up so that some nations provide natural resources which are shipped someplace else and then processed into a finished product. And the BRICS countries are like, we want to do the processing. We want to manufacture. We want to sell the finished products. But the agreements that are in place aren't set up to do that. So their efforts to move more from raw mining of iron, for example, into providing products that are manufactured with iron is we have to separate from the entire set of rules that prevents us from doing this. So we're going to start our own group and we're going to create our own rules. So that seems to be what BRICS is. And they're starting to do it, near as I can tell. I don't know how long it's going to take before, Botswana is a source of diamonds. So how long will it be until they become a source of finished jewelry? I don't know, but that's the direction they seem to be moving in.
Fair point. Okay, so interesting. We learned from the other episodes where we had some amazing guests. That's not exactly how things should work, and they usually end up costing more than you anticipate. And I give also the example of the planned economy that I grew up in, again, the communist period, where you produce stuff that nobody needs and just use it for the sake of it. And that's not an option either. Okay, essentially, we covered a couple of things about that. I want to move on to the second item that you said is going to have, and it's already having a big influence on the future. And I was reading an article the other day, a few months or maybe could be years back, I don't even remember, about how the climate change has influenced certain routes about where planes have traveled, especially in Asia. And some people have confirmed to me that it's not the same experience they had 10 years ago as of now. More turbulences, more delays, more emergency landings and whatnot, especially around Thailand, Vietnam, and all that area. Probably still insignificant if you look at it from a global scale, but still something that many specialists are at least concerned. And that's in a way natural. First of all, climate change is a delicate topic. Some people would kill. It's a life or death situation, theoretically for everyone. So we should be aware. Probably somewhere in the middle. I'm not the extremist, not denying that the climate, personally, of course, I'm just speaking of myself, not even Kevin right now. I personally believe that we humans have an influence on the climate, of course, can have an influence, positive or negative. It's probably not as extreme as some describe, but we need to be aware. We need to not do things just because, and we need to raise awareness, of course. Climate has always changed for the past couple of 100,000 years. It has influenced how the human have lived, where they migrated, what kind of food they ate, what kind of crops they had, what kind of animals they raised and so forth, and most likely will change. Probably not that as such an accelerated rate as it is right now, but we start seeing these influences more and more. And one example is the one that I just gave about some airplane routes. And obviously this will translate into either, it's going to end up in costing us more. Essentially, all these will cost us more, the ones that we are actually using that, because they're either going to need to take different routes, or they're going to need to make investments to better equipment, or maybe some, I don't know, fly at a higher altitude or lower altitude, which consumes more gas. And gas nowadays, kerosene might be influenced again by the geopolitics of the world and so forth. But expect things locally in other places as well. To your point, you gave the Florida example. Probably those places weren't actually the best place to build houses in the first place. So I don't think that was something new. I think Florida always experienced hurricanes and all kinds of climate influences, more drastic than other places. Even right now, we see at the World Cup that the game was suspended for 2 hours due to a storm yesterday. I think Argentina's game was suspended because of a severe storm alert. And those were historically kind of like always there. It's not that it happened overnight. To an extent, probably those where people build those houses that the insurance don't want to insure anymore shouldn't supposed to be there in the first place either. But that's just an assumption right now. I think based on only a couple of information. So back to you.
Insurance is a lot more important to economies than most people generally think about. So the concept of insurance and various forms of doing it is now about 4,000 years old. But without insurance, there would never have been trade. Because if you go back to the early days, like the earliest form of trade were these camel caravans across the desert. And by modern standards, they were relatively small volumes and they took a long time to complete. But basically, a whole bunch of guys and a whole bunch of camels would leave. And then 2 or 3 years later, they would come back with other stuff, right? Well, sometimes they didn't come back at all, but the people who had pooled the money, they didn't want to lose all their money. So there was this concept of pooling resources to share risk. People were able to buy shares in ventures rather than having to fund the entire thing, et cetera, right? So this carried over into maritime trade. Same thing. Ships would go out. Like everyone knows of Ferdinand Magellan, right? First guy to circumnavigate the globe, although he didn't actually because he got killed in the Philippines. But what a lot of people don't know is 5 ships and about 200 guys left. And then 3 years later, 1 ship and about 20 guys came back. What happened to the other ships and the other guys? The ship sank and the guys died, right? It was risky, right? Now, having said that, they came back with a ship full of cloves. Cloves were so valuable that the initial investors and the 20 guys were like, they made out like bandits. The 20 guys were set for life because they had made so much money.
Exactly the same principle that venture capitalists from Silicon Valley these days operate under, right? They make like investments, billions of dollars of investments that, and 90% of them don't pan out, simply go bankrupt or money burn, essentially, money thrown into a fire. Yet if one successful, it compensates and then adds tremendous wealth to the others.
It's hard to overstate the degree to which insurance is embedded in every aspect of the economy. Maybe not every aspect, but almost every aspect. And has been now, I was going to say in a modern monetary economy, but insurance has been important to commerce for about 4,000 years. Even the ships that are stuck in the Persian Gulf, it's not the case that they can't attempt to run the Gulf, if you will, and maybe they'll make it out unmolested. It's that the insurance coverage doesn't cover acts of war. So the people who own the cargo and the people who own the ships are like making a judgment call. Do we try and get out and hope that the Iranians don't hit us with missiles and drones? Or do we just incur the daily cost of the ship being parked in the Persian Gulf? And they're choosing to incur the daily cost of the ships being parked in the Persian Gulf for a variety of reasons. One of which is if they run the Gulf, they've temporarily at least forfeited their insurance policy for that duration, right? And the value of the cargoes in these ships is almost hard for us to imagine. It's worth so much money. So they're not attempting to get out without permission as a result. And every aspect of the economy. So as extreme weather events start destroying stuff, I mentioned in a prior episode that some years ago, 10, 12 years ago, a hurricane flew through the Caribbean and it destroyed factories in Puerto Rico that produced intravenous bags. So there was a 5 or 6 month delay in US hospitals being able to apply their intravenous bags. Those are insurable events. And I'm sure that the expenses of getting the factories back online were paid in part by the insurance companies. As that happens more and more, the insurance companies have to charge more for the premiums. And it gets to a point where it's just not worth it. I can't afford to make intravenous bags in Puerto Rico if I got to pay that much for insurance. It really will have a disruptive effect on commerce. So, I don't know. Insurance really is the canary in the coal mine when it comes to climate change. And we'll just have to wait and see how things unfold. I suspect that major economic decisions of what to build where and how it moves from point A to point B are going to be heavily influenced by the cost of insurance.
For those who don't know, the canary in the coal mine, give us a description. What does that actually mean? It took me, I learned about it 2 or 3 years ago.
Some mining operations produce gases that have the potential to be lethal, but you can't smell them. So they would take a canary into the coal mine, and if the canary dropped dead, they would all leave.
Simple as that.
And every once in a while, the canary dropped dead, and that was their early warning indicator, and they were very thankful that they thought to take one down with them.
Imagine how many people died before they figured this one out.
Yeah, it's a kind of a morbid thought.
And coming back to the main topic, so the world will look like probably all the premiums will go up. Car, house, health, in terms of pricing. How about and it's really because when you inject AI into the thinking, then realistically and honestly, you need to stop a little bit and say, okay, but is this actually true? With the help of AI, we can do so many things, including some prediction at a scale that were unprecedented. You were showing me just before we hit record about a tool that you built with a couple of prompts in a matter of minutes that will show you the trade flow of around the world. So right now it's at our fingertips. We can build some tools. We have the information, we have the capacity to do it. So in that paradigm, I don't think it will be, it'll be interesting. I don't even know where to approach and where things will be. Probably more of a Star Trek universe where people will
potentially
love and work for everyone's benefit. The socialist dream, essentially.
A Star Trek universe is an optimistic view. The other potential way that we could go would be the Hunger Games. It depends on some pretty major decisions that need to be made. To just talk about AI briefly in terms of its ability to make existing problems worse and its ability to solve existing problems, I think in the short term, we all just have to acknowledge that it's actually going to make existing problems worse. If the predictions of widespread unemployment come to fruition, that's not going to be an easy transition. And AI consumes currently enormous amounts of energy and enormous amounts of water, and we don't have good solutions, but we all want the AI, so we're accepting of this. However, as the technology progresses, each generation consumes less energy, and eventually we'll get down to where they consume very modest amounts of energy. And I saw just today, NVIDIA announced a data center cooling system built on antifreeze, like a car, right? So it actually doesn't use much water at all. So as these technologies become available and get deployed, that will put less stress on our energy and water system. But as you commented, these AI tools do allow us to think of complex systems in more, I hate this word, but I'm going to use it anyway, more holistic ways. And to describe for the viewers, so we did an episode a while ago about energy resilience versus the efficiency of production and distribution with Wes. And I was just curious about global energy flows. So I used OpenAI Codex to literally vibe code, and I'll put this on the website somewhere, a somewhat interactive chart of global crude oil flows from country to country. And in aggregate, it probably took me maybe 30 minutes to put this whole thing together from scratch. I went through a couple of iterations. First, it was just US exports and US imports, and then can you do the entire world? But now on this web page, you can select the country of export you want to look at, or the country of import, or just look at everything. Although looking at everything is a little overwhelming because exporters on the left, importers on the right, and arrows of various thickness running from one to the other, the thickness of the arrow indicating the volume of oil that flows. And it was remarkably easy to put this chart together. It is actually quite impressive.
How accurate is the data, though? That still needs to be double-checked humanly.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I told Codex to go to publicly available data sources on its own and download the data, and it identified the sources where the data came from. I'm watching it. Okay, I'm getting this file from this place, this file from this place. It saved all the files on my local computer. So all of that can be verified, but I agree needs to be verified. But I understand that in the realm of biological sciences, people are developing AIs that can do protein manipulations a lot better than we've ever been able to do before. I'm also trying to use Codex to vibe code like economic modeling, but the challenge is it's easy to create a model that contains equations that are this results in that. The hard part is, do those equations actually mirror the real world? In some cases, I'm building this large complex model and it's like, this model is not real, right? So I go through all the equations one at a time and figure out which ones do and do not map to reality, and then tune the model through iterations, et cetera, right? But that's not really a fault of the tool. That's a fault of my understanding what the relationships actually are. But maybe the tool can help me, go out there and look at real data and then generate equations that can explain how you get from this to this. Maybe the tool can help me with that. I don't know. But people are going to be using these tools for that kind of stuff in a wide variety of disciplines, including geoengineering the planet in response to climate change. Now, I know that people say, who are we to geoengineer the planet? Like, it's a very presumptuous thing to do. And I think what those people are missing is that we've been geoengineering the planet for 250 years now. We've just been doing it by accident. We're going to need to get more structured, we're going to need to figure out how to do it right in response to the fact that we've been doing it accidentally now for 250 years. We're going to have to counter that. And I don't know exactly what that's going to mean. I don't actually know if we can successfully vent heat into space, because space is, when it comes to heat, space is an insulator. Like, when heat conducts through stuff, there's got to be stuff for it to conduct through. And when you leave the atmosphere, there's no stuff for the heat to conduct through, right? So I don't know exactly how that's going to work, but hopefully people a lot smarter than me are working on that and trying to figure it out. But if we can figure out a way to vent the heat out of the atmosphere, we'll probably be working on that. We'll probably be sprinkling reflective material in the upper atmosphere, dropping it out of airplanes in order to reflect the infrared back out into space. So at least we can, while not necessarily reducing the aggregate temperature of the atmosphere, at least we can prevent it from growing more quickly. But yeah, that's going to be a part of the future.
To your point, just said that he's going to put some data centers in space. So that if that pans out, it's going to be significantly cheaper.
I don't know how they're going to cool them. Like, again, you've got this data center in space generating an enormous amount of heat, and relative to heat conduction, space is an insulator. The reason we can cool data centers on Earth is the water flows through and the water takes the heat someplace else, right? But if you're in space, where is this someplace else?
Find it. But where I was going to, and reiterate the importance of AI and how we can help the little guy, in this case, actually the little guy, me, you, and anyone essentially can build some stuff that they were all close to impossible. So if we can do that, then larger organizations or larger entities, imagine what they can do about it. And they're doing it. To your
Yeah.
point, medical advancements have been made significant for the past couple of years. Tech, science, all the aspects. Just look at, even I follow the space and how many things they discover as well. With the help of AI, they can process some stuff faster. They can at least not waste time and spend their time more efficiently. What matters or what can bring those results as well. So I think that will be the thing that will have the most impactful influence on our daily lives within the next 3 to 5 years. I'm pretty sure that by the end of this year, the accessible, available AI LLM will be 80% as good as anyone else within most job positions. Okay, so it was already a decent writer, and with the help and some guidance, it can become a great writer, can help you write great content. Now the design aspect is becoming better and better. It's good with video manipulation. So like many bookkeeping, posting, virtual assistants, these are like, I don't see them 2 years from now, for example. I don't see the need of those positions done by a human 2 years from now. Yes, will I double check if Claude, for example, does my entries, bookkeeping? Yes, I'll double check myself. But will I have somebody else, a third person, double check it? It's very time consuming, but you still need, and I do bookkeeping manually myself. And there's benefits to that. There's no particular reason why I cannot delegate this right now to an AI, for example. You can easily fed, this is the bank statement, put it in a sheet. You can already download them, whatever, but depends on your workflow. I have a different workflow for certain reasons. But I know other organizations that pay a lot of money for this. There's, at the moment, we're recording this June 23rd, 2026. There's no particular reason why a human should do that.
I think this is a specific example of the short-term disruption, but I'm increasingly starting to view AI as a knowledge amplifier. And I'm going to go back to the example I just used where I'm trying to build a complex dynamic model of the US economy by vibe coding it with Codex. If I knew what I was doing, this would be a fantastic tool. And the failure is, I don't know what I'm doing, right? So I got this tool that allows me to greatly amplify what I know in terms of an interactive tool I can use to run simulations, but I don't know what I'm doing, right? So I'm learning what equations are and are not meaningful while simultaneously learning to use the tool. And in many ways, the tool being Codex is turning out to be a learning aid because I can look at this page of equations that it spits out, and now I got to audit them one at a time. Is this one reasonable? Is this one reasonable? Is this one reasonable? And by virtue of doing that, I'm going to learn what is and is not reasonable. And through, I don't know how many iterations, I will eventually come up with a good model, right? But in the meantime, the problem with this process is not the tool. It's my lack of knowledge about what relationships really matter.
But you're just describing how AI is training you?
Yeah. Or helping me learn. Not so much that the AI is training me, but it's like Khan Academy on steroids.
I think we should leave it at that because otherwise there's so many things that we could talk about. 10 years ago, I wrote an article, 10, 12 years ago actually, about the future and what the world would look like. Back then, I wasn't off by much. I wasn't right by many, but one thing I would like to end with is the conclusion from this essay, essentially not an article, but an essay, and it's called Après la fin du monde, after the end of the world. It's a song by Demis Roussos. I like to use songs as whenever I try to describe something, and I'm reading it in Romanian, so I'm gonna do my best to translate it in real time in Romania. Obviously, we could use AI, but it won't get the nuances that I use. We live extremely times. Currently, things change, but we adapt and somehow made it as humans to integrate in every situation. Internet and social media gave a significant boost and value to our daily lives globally. Nobody, I think, was anticipating the extreme popularity these have become, diversifying our lives in every manner possible and giving access to funds, to capital, to people all around the world. Think about the influencers. However, this freedom is becoming more gated. One thing is security, and according to the threats, some might be willing to give up this liberty. Still believe in that. So I don't want to be faced to make this trade anytime soon. Everything needs to be balanced. With AI, use it wisely. It can help. Don't rely on it. And be prepared, because I believe long, medium term, we're all going to suffer more or less, because AI is simply good. Good enough, at least. Good enough.
Back to my comment of AI as a knowledge amplifier, it really depends on what we choose to amplify. We could amplify stuff that creates a lot of good. We could also amplify stuff that creates a lot of suffering. Kind of a morbid thought, but yeah, it's a possibility.
I probably my biggest frustration right now is because I work in SEO, and for example, you won't believe how many customers, clients, or prospects just send me these reports made by Claude or ChatGPT and say, oh, this is what ChatGPT says, this is what Claude says, this is what there is. And I tell them usually, you do the same thing with your doctor. Whenever you go to him, you do the same thing. This is what ChatGPT said. This is what Claude told me that I have. So take everything with a grain of salt. Be prepared.
Yeah.
And the most important thing that you can do right now is go to CuriousPundits.com. That's our website. As of today, we have a new website that we're both very happy and fond of. We're going to be making updates. We're going to add stuff. It looks pretty. It's a place where you can find previous recordings, these recordings, future recordings, and links to all the platforms where you can listen to the podcast: Apple, Stitcher, Spotify. Please leave us a comment, hopefully a positive one and a positive rating, because that will help us amplify the reach and get other people to know us. Until then, my name is Emanuel.
My name is Kevin, and thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you like the podcast, please like, subscribe, and tell others. Visit CuriousPundits.com to learn more, and stay tuned for the next episode.